Hello everyone and welcome to Step Into Your Power interview. I'm Rosa B. Really appreciate you all joining me today. This is a big one, right? It's all about the interview and the psychology of the interview. So I wanted to thank our BSL interpreter and captions lady who's joining us today. As ever, they do an absolutely fabulous job. And of course, to the wonderful Toby. Toby, who is our director, he is behind the scenes, making sure that you get this webinar delivered. So Toby might be actually coming on camera because we want to ensure that this webinar today is highly interactive. And of course, that means that we welcome and we hope that you will share your stories with us and your insights and your experiences around the whole process of interviews. So don't be shy, get on the chat box, or you can ask some Q&As at the very end of this webinar. We expect this webinar to be about 35, 40, 45 minutes. It really depends on how interactive it is. So we do welcome your insights and your stories. This PowerPoint will be accessible for all and it's inclusive. So I am recorded and Toby will be recorded, but you will not be recorded. So I just wanted to make that quite clear. Now, what I wanted to do was let you know that there may be a survey at the very end of this PowerPoint, and we are going to be running an insights poll because we want to gain your insight into how you feel and the sort of experiences you've had at interview. So let's go. Okay, so what are we going to learn today? Well, come on guys, get on the chat box. Who likes interviewing? Is it a meaningful way to test your suitability? What do you think? Do you think that interviews are a really good predictor of future performance? Well, whether we like it or not, the interview format is here to stay for the foreseeable future. However, what I can say is that employers really are starting to look at new and innovative and alternative ways instead of interviews. So job interviews are just like any other human interaction. So has anyone been on the dating scene lately? Well, it's like a test, right? But most people dislike tests. It feels like a bit of a pressure cooker that you have to put on a performance, right? Well, here's the thing. Interviews are influenced by psychological factors. By understanding the psychology of the interview and applying techniques that work for you, you can actually exert some influence over the interview, because interviews do feel like you don't have a lot of control, right? You have an interviewer who's controlling it and asking all the questions. So here's what we're going to cover today on interview psychology. We're going to look at the power of a positive mindset, asking for adjustments that can work for you throughout the recruitment process. But specifically today, we'll focus on interviews, asking for adjustments or requesting adjustments, just before your interview. Practical strategies that can help you thrive just before you launch into the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. So what's really important is that you share your insights and your stories. What kind of experiences have you had? And in particular, what has worked for you? I'm just going to keep my chat box open so I can start to see everyone's chat. Toby, feel free to interrupt and share any of the interactions that come up that you think is insightful.
Well, we've got a few questions actually from the chat box, which we can read out if you like, Rosa.
Okay.
So someone has said, I have had an interview and asked the questions in advance as I have autism, and they changed the questions to remove me because of my disability.
Yeah, I can see that. I'd like you to expand or, so that we can explore that a little bit more, because that's actually one thing that I do suggest later on. So it's saying here, somebody else is saying, I can't understand the subtle body language and tone of voice. I also take instructions literally. You know what, guys, you're all saying things that I really understand. There's a whole thing around perception management and how one is supposed to behave in an interview, right? So there's lots of stuff coming in already. I don't actually think that interviews are primarily designed to assess whether you can actually do the job, rather than they're an exercise designed to, or rather indeed to allow you to demonstrate that you're a nice person and that the interviewer is going to enjoy working with you. I get it. It does feel like it's all about perception management, isn't it? And that we're putting on a performance, because interviews feel very unnatural, right? I've always felt very unnatural in an interview. I just prefer having a conversation, a back and forth. It feels like it's a little more equal. And it gives me, it allows me to perform at my best, but everyone's a little different. So someone's also saying here, it's Barry. Barry is saying, thank you for joining. Asking for questions in advance has helped, but the response from employers has been patchy. I agree, Barry, 100%. It has been very, very patchy. I wonder why that is. Here's something that you could do. You could say, ask for the questions in advance, but also suggest or offer solutions and say, you could also offer these questions to everyone, so it's inclusive and everyone is on a equal footing, right? So I will come back and forth in the chat box, but again, Toby, if you could just monitor it and let me know. I think this is going to be an interesting webinar today. So learning outcomes. Here's what we're going to try and focus on: explore and learn. The power of a positive mindset. Easier said than done, right? But we're going to look at some simple strategies that you might want to consider using. Now, I get that not all of these strategies and ideas are going to work for everyone. But again, share with us what has worked for you. Asking for adjustments, practical strategies to help you thrive, and sharing interview stories. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Toby. I love insights. Don't know about you, but we're going to do a little insight poll. Simple question. If you wouldn't mind answering this for us, tell us how you're feeling right now. Are you confident in your ability to nail your next interview? Based on how you're feeling right now in your mind, in your mindset. Toby, do you think that we could run this poll towards the end of the webinar again?
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see the transition from this poll right into the end of the poll.
Absolutely. So are you totally confident? You feel you can nail it. Not very confident, not sure, or just not got a clue. I know that some people just don't know how to gauge, how confident they'll be in an interview. And they say things like, research the organization, try to find out what type of interview they're going to hold, do lots and lots of prep. But what I'm going to offer today is something a little different. Now, I'm going to go back to the chat whilst we're waiting for the Insight poll results. So here's what Catherine has said. Catherine, thank you for joining us today. I once turned up for an interview and they asked if I had my presentation. They had not got in touch to tell me, oh my goodness, I needed to do a presentation. Oh, wow. No surprise, I didn't get the job. Wow. I'm just sort of wondering, Catherine, then, who's at fault here? If you weren't advised that you needed to deliver a PowerPoint presentation, surely there should have been some investigation or some allowances made where you could actually have created the PowerPoint presentation and maybe delivered it at a later date. That's really quite shocking. Thanks for sharing. We've got Charles. Charles is saying, I have complex PTSD, and if I get overwhelmed, it can derail the interview, or that it is what I fear due to no practice when having post-traumatic stress disorder. Charles, I really want to thank you for sharing this with us. I totally get this. Even just the thought of going into an interview can in of itself be incredibly overwhelming. But we'll look at this, we'll look at some strategies later on. And what I'd like you to do is to keep an open mind and think about them and come back into the chat and share with us whether you think this is something that could possibly work for you. Would you like to do that? Okay, Toby, do we have the results from the Insight poll?
Yes, I'll share the results now.
Okay, so guys, 12% are totally confident in their ability to nail their next interview. 76% are saying not very confident, not sure, and 12% not a clue. So really, if we look at that, that's about 88% not confident and not having a clue. So let's see where we get to as we run through this webinar. Again, I love to hear stories. I like to understand other people's perspectives. And I know that there's a few of you out there that have probably had some horror stories about interviews, but equally on the positive side, have probably had some success with your interview. And so I would like you to share that, what's worked for you. So let's get stuck into it, Toby. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to thank you for sharing your insights. So what I wanted to do was share some insights to you. I thought I'd do it in a fun way. I'm going to do a trivia quiz. You've got to guess the number or guess the percentage, right? So can you guess, and again, put it into the chat box, right? The number of candidates that are typically interviewed per job. What do you think that number is? Toby, got any idea?
Oh gosh, 10. Somebody's saying 4, another person saying 30, another person 50,
15. Yeah.
5, 25, 25, getting quite a few.
Thank you, guys. Do you know, it's really interesting because I spoke to a young lady about 2 weeks ago. I'm kidding you not. She told me that there was 200 people. She thought that was interviewed for a particular job. And I thought, are you kidding me? Was it 200? Or maybe was it for multiple jobs? But, you know, there's lots of numbers flying around. But on average, the number of candidates interviewed per job is 6. 6 candidates. Again, in terms of the number of applications per job, it really does depend on the role. I remember speaking to somebody else about a week ago, and she didn't get shortlisted. But again, there had been over 300 applications for the job. So it is can be a very, very competitive marketplace out there, dependent on the role and sometimes on the organization. And if you think about it, we are really in very unusual times at the moment with COVID and how that is impacting our world of work. But it's 6 candidates on average that are interviewed per job. On to the next one. Now, here's a little interesting fact for you. Did you know that 2% of candidates who apply for a job are selected to attend? Okay, so it just gives you an idea of you know, the competition that's out there. Okay, so average interview stages. How many interview stages are there typically, do you think? Again, this is going to depend on the organization, but mostly, you know, organizations do want to try and hire someone as soon as possible. So what do you think is the average number of interview stages? 3, 2, 2, 3. It's 2. So that might be, you know, the panel interview. And then it may be followed by some sort of testing, like psychometric testing or numeracy testing, something like that. Or it can usually be a telephone interview, then followed by a one-to-one or a panel interview. But the average is 2. And by the way, I'm getting these stats from Glassdoor and Indeed. So, okay, what is the percentage of candidates who, when they feel disrespected in the recruitment process, will pull out? This is a really interesting one. What do you think that number looks like? Because if you think about it, guys, the interview is really, it should be a two-way street. You're interviewing the employer as much as the employer is interviewing you, right? But sometimes we often don't perceive it to be like that. We often feel it's a one-way street. But you have an opportunity to interview the employer and ask questions of them as they are asking questions of you. So percentage of candidates who when they felt disrespected in the recruitment process, end up pulling out. So we're getting here, Toby.
10%, 75%, 65%, 25%, quite a range.
Guys, It's a whopping 75%. So the reason why I wanted to bring this particular stat up is that, again, when we talk about perception management, it's as critical for employers to make sure that they get their recruitment process and their hiring processes down pat, that it's inclusive, that it's easy, and that it's not cumbersome for job seekers to apply. So, we are also monitoring employers just as much as they are checking us out, in a sense. So 75% of candidates, when they feel they've been disrespected, and it kind of comes back to Catherine, that time when you weren't told that you had to deliver a PowerPoint and you turned up to your interview. So at that stage, that's just an example of maybe when a candidate may feel disrespected, and so therefore they will opt out of the process, because you want to make sure that throughout that recruitment and hiring process, that it feels comfortable for you, that you're confident in that process, and therefore potentially confident in working for that employer, right? So that's a big one. So the next one, out of 10 employers, what's the number who may reject candidates based on their perceived lack of enthusiasm? Toby, got any idea what you think this number is?
Oh, it's a hard one. To be 12%.
12%. Do you think that out of 10, it's out of 10 actually, so it's not percentage, it's out of 10. So is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 employers may reject you if it's perceived that you're not projecting enthusiasm?
Should we go 5%? Quite a few people are saying 6, 8, 9, 5.
Okay. 9. Somebody said 9, somebody said 8. Oh, wow, you have little faith in the employer. Right. It's actually 4 in 10. 4 in 10 employers, if they think that you're not projecting enthusiasm, that may impact how they perceive you, and therefore on whether you will get the job or not. So there's a sense that, again, it's all about perception management, and optics matter. Okay, here's another one. Here's the results of a survey of 2,000 hiring managers. It was found that 33% knew whether they would hire someone in the first 90 seconds. I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are. I'm sort of thinking, yikes, really? In the first 90 seconds, they have it all worked out. Here's the thing. There's a chap called Dr. Nicholas Rulin. He is author of The Psychology of Job Interviews. And here's what he says. Interviewers can have biases that affect the way they interact or interpret the information they receive from a candidate. So that's interesting, right? So we have to overcome that unconscious bias and really focus our attention on our fabulous talents, our strengths, and our assets. And we can do that in a way where we are showing the value, and I'm going to underline that word, the value that we're bringing to that employer. And of course, that all comes down to understanding the job spec. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. And again, I just thought I would share that in a kind of a little trivia way, just to give you some insights into what the world of interviewing is sort of looking like right now. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, I want to spend some time talking about adjustments. So do you have, or have you asked for adjustments throughout the recruitment process? And in particular, have you requested them prior to your interview? If so, what have you asked for? How has it helped you? And what sort of response have you had from employers? Now, I know that somebody had mentioned earlier about the asking for the questions in advance. I think it was Barry who said it can be very, very patchy. Some employers will and some won't. And I get that. Some may sort of feel that that's a step too far, that they may be giving someone, a more of a sort of a heads up than someone else. But the simple way around that is to share those questions with everyone, right? Often if you don't ask, you don't get. The best way, I think, to attack that is to really think about, why you're asking for that particular adjustment. So there may be a little bit of explaining your condition and why giving you the questions in advance can be supportive to you and how it will allow you to thrive in the interview. So back to adjustments. This is all, of course, before you're heading into the interview. And this is all about requesting adjustments. So I wanted to share this quote with you because I really liked it. It's from Samantha Johnson, Divisional Director of TPP. And TTP is a specialist UK-wide recruitment consultancy firm. And they specialize with partners, but they focus on profit, non-profit, and the public sector. So, okay, she says, leveling out the playing, adjustments are all about leveling out the playing field and not about putting you at an advantage. So Barry, it goes back to, again, that thing about, the questions, and maybe some employers think that that's giving you an advantage. But it's about, here's what she says, it's about ensuring you are given the chance to confidently perform to the best of your ability throughout the recruitment process and beyond. So again, as I say, if we don't ask, we don't get, right, Toby?
Absolutely.
Next slide. Okay, so, asking for or requesting adjustments. Here's a little exercise that you can do. Now, I want to share a little story with you. I had a very late adult diagnosis of ADHD. And so I'll be honest with you, I had no idea, no clue what I actually could be asking for, because I thought, well, this is me, I'm normal. I've had this condition all my life. I really don't know what I need to be asking for. So I spent a lot of time educating myself on my condition. And I realized that I had been masking quite a lot. And I thought, okay, wow, I'm going to check this whole space of adjustments out and find out what is possible, because I don't want to mask. I don't want to cover up maybe my overwhelm or my stress or my anxiety. So you know what? I'm going to self-advocate for myself, but I'm going to get to know who I am by understanding how my condition affects me in my world of work. So just before the interview, here's a little advocating for adjustments exercise that you can do. And again, this is drawn from a wonderful blog article that Samantha had written on the TPP website. So become your own expert in your condition. So you may have had your disability or your neurodiversity or your short or long-term mental or physical condition from way back, or it may be something that's new to you. So therefore, understanding how your condition affects you potentially in your world of work will really help you understand what challenges you may face, but also what supports may help you, because you want to be at your best and you want to thrive in your world of work, right? So why not reflect on previous jobs? Think about the past jobs that you were in. What was holding you back? Sorry, guys, there should be a K at the end of that. But what was holding you back in that previous job? What impact was that having? And what if that barrier wasn't there? What could you have been doing, or how could you have been achieving? So you also want to review the position description, that job that you're applying for. Take a really good thorough look through the bullet points, the different sections. Make a list of the challenges or the barriers that you feel you might face in that particular job. Identify key adjustments relevant to the job and share with the recruiter. Now, you may be working with a recruitment agency, or you may also be working directly with the recruiter in an organization. So what you want to do is you want to share with the recruiter your condition. You don't want to spend too much time explaining the negative impact of your condition, but what you want to do is you want to very concisely and simply express, what adjustments you may need and why. That's to help back up and support getting the adjustment in the interview. It's also a great opportunity to share with that recruiter or hiring manager a little bit about your condition, because guess what? We don't like assumptions being made, right? We've got to educate others and bust myths along the way. I'm a big believer in becoming your own self-advocate and educating others, because often if people don't know how to support you, they don't know because they don't have the insight or the awareness around your condition. So it's our responsibility to educate and share and provide some insight. Now, offer and request solutions. I think it's very important because, you know, they've mentioned that optics really matter. So it's really important when you're asking for accommodations that you are not just requesting, but you're providing solutions. It projects confidence, and also, you know, it enables that recruiter or hiring manager to actually be able to deliver on that for you. So it's important that we are the driver and that we are not just requesting, but providing potential solutions. And often those solutions are really, really simple, and we're not asking for the world, right? If you're still not sure what adjustments to ask for, there is an absolutely fabulous website called Jobs Accommodation Network. It's an American site, but it gives a whole list of all the different types of conditions. And within that, it actually offers strategies and support information around how you can thrive in the world of work. But it also, on top of that, provides ideas and suggestions on the sort of adjustments you could get or you could ask for. So I highly recommend it. There will be a link at the very, very end of this. But Toby, if you get a chance, please pop it into the chat box if people want to click on it and have a look. So what are people saying in the chat box now?
Someone is saying, I use the recruitment adjustment process to determine the level of insight of the employer.
You use the recruitment adjustment process. Yeah. And Barry, why do you do that? How is that helpful for you? Is that telling you how serious they are about their diversity and inclusion? You know, there's a big thing where we talk about, you know, employers needing to walk the talk. Certainly it gives you insight into how that employer might behave if you are successful in the interview and you do get that opportunity. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Barry, on that. Why are you doing that and how is that helpful? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so adjustments, there's so many, right? We all have different needs. We all have different, therefore we'll have different adjustments. My ADHD will be different from your ADHD and so on and so forth. So that's why it's really important for us to understand, you know, what those adjustments may be. But here's just an example. Did you know that you can get a British Sign Language interpreter for an interview provided for by Access to Work? That's right. So did you know that you could ask for a test to be untimed or for more time? These are those psychometric tests. I know I would instantly feel really overwhelmed and under pressure to deliver with assessments. I'm not too sure how you feel about this. I have dyslexia, and so my short-term memory isn't great. I mean, to be honest with you, you know, I've often been in an interview where an employer has asked like a double-barreled question, and I've literally forgotten what he has asked by the very end of the question because I'm a little stressed out and my memory's not processing what the interviewer is saying. Have you ever felt like that? So, you know, with psychometric tests, here's another story. I had a lovely gentleman who actually requested that his psychometric test not be timed, that they completely remove the time element on it, and they did. But guess what? He actually finished the assessment well and truly before everyone else and within plenty of time. It was just the thought of being timed that was immediately putting him under a tremendous sense of pressure and anxiety. So it's really interesting, the psychology of timed assessments, etc. So why not go for it and ask for the assessment to be untimed or ask for more time? What about asking for the interview format? Now, employers can be quite good at actually sharing and being very transparent about their interview format. A really good employer throughout the hiring and recruitment process will actually share and be very open about their interview style, their structure, and will provide lots of information. I know that some employers within government agencies are really excellent at doing this. They give a lot of information, so it's very clear, and so that there's no confusion for the candidate. But you could always ask for the interview format. Is it a situational based interview? Is it competency based? Maybe it's a strengths based interview. Perhaps it's a hybrid, because some employers do often go down the hybrid way of interviewing. So I want to ask for that format in advance. If not, go to Glassdoor. It's a fabulous tool that you can use to sort of find out a little bit more about employers, their hiring methods, the sort of interview questions that they will ask, including the format. Now, asking for questions or themes of the questions in advance. Somebody had spoken to this in the chat box earlier. This is a really interesting one, and yes, it can be a really tricky one. Why are you asking for the questions? How might that best support you? Again, ask or offer, I should say, offer a solution and suggest that they offer it out to all candidates so that everyone's on an equal footing. Now, if it's not possible to get the questions in advance or the themes of questions, so when I talk about themes, you know, I mean, usually it'll be quite clear because of the job description. We know that they're going to focus on those skills that they've referenced in the job description. But rather than giving you the questions directly, they may give you areas that they're going to cover. Now, here's another idea. What if you were to ask them to provide a printout copy of the questions for you during the interview? I think that can be very, very helpful, because there's some of us who may have some memory issue. And so therefore, just having the questions on the table that you can sort of read off or refer to can be very, very helpful. What are your thoughts on that one? Now, ask if you can take notes in the interview. That's quite common. People can ask for that. That's not an issue. What about requesting a time slot that works for you? A lot of us have conditions that impacts our energy, fibromyalgia, lots of other conditions. And so therefore, your energy may be up and best in the morning or in the afternoon. So why not ask for a specific time slot that kind of, you know, works with your energy and when you sort of feel you're going to be at your best performance. So that's just a little trick. Now, has anyone asked for adjustments? Have you got the adjustments, and how have they helped you? Toby, what are people saying in the chat box?
Okay, we've got an interesting comment from someone saying, surely people who are disabled have special skills to cope with their disability. This involves really good time management and structure/rules. Just sell it to the interview.
That's a really, I like that perspective. We did a really interesting webinar called How to be a Premium Candidate in the interview. And we talked, we focused specifically on how you can use your disability or your neurodiversity as a strength in the interview. Often, you know, especially if you've got a physical disability and it's very, very obvious and you're in the interview, then, you know, one way of dealing with that is actually, you know, removing the elephant from the room, so to speak, and giving an example of how your disability or your neurodiversity has actually been a positive thing in your life, because we have been very creative in the way we get around things, how we problem solve. We have tremendous resilience and grit, right? We have brilliant, you know, we have empathy because we understand how others might be feeling or, you know, what they're going through. And so I think that you can use that in your interview, but you have to be very strategic about it and selective, because it has to be relevant to the job that you're applying for. So does it fit into, or can you give an example of, you know, one of your strengths, not in spite of, because of your disability or your neurodiversity, that's going to nail one of those key selection criteria on the job spec? Just saying. I'm keen to find out what other people's thoughts are on that. Anything else in the chat box, Toby?
Not really. Should we carry on to the next slide?
Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to talk about reframing. I want you to, however, share with me, give me just one word to express how you feel when you are just about to go into your interview. I'll kick off with some words. So, a nervous wreck. Well, that's actually 3 words. A pressure cooker. Do you feel like a pressure cooker? Maybe you feel overwhelmed. Maybe you feel like stressed out. What conjures up? What word can you conjure up, or that kind of elegantly expresses how you feel when you're going into the interview? Toby, what have you thought about interviews in the past, and how have you felt?
General dread, feeling a bit sick.
Okay.
Same feelings. We're getting quite a few from the chat box. Someone saying vulnerable, fear, confusion, calm before the storm, terror.
I like all of those. I like all of those. Okay. Sometimes we can be feeling really nervous or quite nervous, anxious. You know, these thoughts can be quite self-sabotaging, right? You know, that self-talk, that that criticizes that we have going on inside our head, and we end up getting ourselves into a real muddle, into a real loop. I can't do this job. Why did I apply for the job? I can't remember anything. I'm stressing out. And that's not going to be helpful for us as we're just about to step into the interview. So your negative thoughts, I want you to think about this. Your negative thoughts are perceptions only, right? They are not based on reality. They're only a reflection of how you're feeling at that specific moment in time. There's a really interesting chap, Nicholas Rulin, who said that using reframing exercises can be a great way to support you as you're about to go into your interview. So there are powerful techniques that you can use. It can change the way that you feel about yourself as you're just about to enter into the interview. And it allows us to shift our focus onto what matters. And we know what matters: our talents, our strengths, and the value. It goes back to what I said earlier, the value that we can offer this employer. So what he suggests that we do is that we look at this from a different perspective. We create a different story or narrative that's running in our head. Does that make sense for anyone? Has anyone tried this out? Here's a reframing exercise. You want to try and relax and avoid the negative self-speak. I know that's easier said than done. Has anyone managed to do that? And what did you do that helped you reduce that negative self-speak? So you might want to say to yourself, why did I apply for this position in the first instance? What is being valued about me in past roles? And what value am I bringing, or do I offer this company? And what do I really want to focus on in this interview? So, can you share with me if you have used any reframing techniques, or indeed what strategies have you used just before you've gone into your interview that you found have been very helpful? Toby, have you used anything, or what are your thoughts on this?
Well, to be fair, we've got a good comment from someone saying, I plan to create a series of storyboards on Miro for each of my bits and experience outside of any specific interview, and create these narratives. I think that's a really good way of planning, organizing.
Fantastic. So when we talk about these stories and narratives, we really are trying to shift our perspective. We're trying to go from the negative into the positive. Here's the other thing. Sometimes, you know, that very high energy, nervous feeling, and sometimes for me, I get it in the pit of my stomach, right? It's a gut reaction. It's actually my adrenaline going up. And sometimes I think my brain is thinking I'm a nervous wreck, but really I'm actually starting to get powered up and excited. It's my adrenaline kicking off. And sometimes the brain can get a little bit confused between the two. So anything else in the chat box?
I have to ask myself whether it's a catastrophe if I don't get this job. Someone else says mindfulness, breathing techniques. Another person said the world is not going to stop because I have got the interview. So yeah, loads of good comments.
Fantastic. Exactly. And sometimes you won't know till you're actually in the interview whether you actually want the interview yourself. Remember, you can see it as an exchange of ideas, an exchange of possibilities, having a conversation. Sometimes if you think of the interview in those sorts of ways, it can help you feel less stressed. So, it's about creating that story or narrative in your own head. And, if we think about it, if the stories that you're telling yourself about your upcoming interview are negative, that might impact how you deliver and your performance in the interview. But if you're telling positive stories to yourself, it can impact how you perceive yourself, and as a result, how others are then perceiving you, and it can make a difference. So this is just a little reframing exercise. You might be able to come up with your own reframing exercise, but it's just something that you can do 10 or 15 minutes just before you're about to go into that interview. So let's go to the next slide.
You've actually got a really lovely comment about this. Someone says, sometimes I like to think in interviews that they're excited and waiting to interview me, hence why I reached to that stage. And sometimes it helps me to be much more focused on the actual interview instead of how nervous I am.
Fantastic. I love it. That's a perfect example. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm loving this because you're giving me insights into what has worked for you. So I really appreciate it, everyone. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's like a reframe example, right? You might want to shift from no idea why I've been shortlisted. Oh my God, I bet you there have been really strong candidates. And you know what, I never perform well anyway. So you've almost given up before you've gone into the interview. Why do that? Why not shift that in the other direction, in the opposite direction? I've been interviewed because I have the potential, the talent, and the strengths. Otherwise, why would I have been shortlisted, right? So you're probably down to potentially the last 6 rather than the 200 people that applied. So that's a really positive thing, right? So that's just an example of how you might want to reframe. Let's go to the next slide, Toby. Taking control. Oh my goodness. We all know that going into an interview, we feel powerless. We have no control. But actually, it may be the opposite. We have more control than what we think. And this is all about feeling powerful before you actually go into the interview. It's the influence of stepping into your powerful self, so to speak. Now, there's this whole thing about holding power poses, right? There's this whole thing about sitting slightly left to the interviewer, because sitting face on with an interview can be seen as quite combative. So sitting to the left of an interview can be helpful. Does anyone have a power pose? Do you have a powerful pose that you get into? Is it a straight back? Is it, shoulders back? What is it? Maybe you're visualizing a particular pose, like you're a sumo warrior or something like that. Can anyone share with me, how they pose, and has that helped them in the interview? So I think really we're talking probably here a little bit about body language. I'd be really keen to know. High power poses can improve how you feel psychologically. It allows you to take control. It gives you confidence and it builds your self-esteem. For me, I like to kind of prop up a little more and sort of just put my hands on the table. I find that actually calms me down a little. If not, sometimes I might actually have a little fidget device that I'm playing with, but I know that the interviewer will not be able to see it. I have a particular bangle that has multiple sort of bangles in it. I'll just prop it up and show you guys. So I sort of use this and I play with this a little, but obviously it's out of eyesight from the employer, but it allows me to feel calm and it actually enables me to focus. And here's the other thing. If you fidget, right, I've got ADHD, so often I fidget to help me actually focus. But the optics of that is it looks like I am distracted or that I am not listening. So if this is something that you feel that you need to do in an interview, you can always have that conversation with the interviewer. What we want to do is make sure it's not distracting for them too. But maybe a little fidget ring or something like that can actually be really, really supportive. What are your thoughts on that one? Okay, so feeling powerful before and during the interview. Here's a couple of little power exercises. Before the interview, literally visualize in your mind's eye or recall a time when you held power. Other ways to be powerful is, okay, we know you've got to prep and research, the organization and do your prep, but those little star or power success stories can be really, really, really powerful, or a great way of building confidence. And it gives you some comfort, because if you create those star or power examples that meet the job spec, you can feel more confident that that's what's going to come up and that you've prepared as well as you can. For anyone who isn't aware of star or power, it's essentially a little formula that you can use that helps to give you structure whilst you're answering your questions, whilst you're answering the interviewer's questions. Okay, so start of the interview, just strike that higher power pose, get into that pose, and it can just make you feel that little more confident. Toby, what's happening in the chat box?
A lot of comments. Someone is saying Superman pose. I would mirror the person so that it shows me I'm interested. Wearing a tailored suit and a well-fitting suit helps too. Yeah, loads.
Yeah,
I smile, it makes me feel more confident and usually gets a warm response.
Fantastic. Now, so this is all about you taking back some power in the interview, right? There's nothing worse than feeling like you've lost that sense of power or control. There's a quote that says, making yourself feel more powerful makes you appear more powerful outwardly. And actually, it's okay to feel a little nervous or anxious. It's a natural reaction to this sort of experience, right? So according to Nicholas Rulin, again, here's what he says: when you appear nervous or tense, you can trigger what is called a biochemical response in the interview, and that can affect the impression of the interviewer. So we want to try and get into that power pose, or into a position where we are in ourselves feeling relaxed and as comfortable and as confident as we can be, because that in turn will also make the interviewer feel relaxed and comfortable. There's a really interesting technique that I read about, which talks about your breathing. Someone was talking about breathing, making sure that you take very deliberate breaths, slow breaths. And it actually, in the article, it said about trying to match your breathing with that of the interviewers, that it can actually have a positive effect. Now, I don't know whether that works. I've never tried it, but if anyone's tried something like that, please share it in the chat box with us. Okay, so taking control, we have more control than what we think we have. Toby, next slide. Okay, tell me about yourself. Have you ever been asked this question? This is kind of like the icebreaker question that they ask before, in the interview, to kind of like, warm us up. So tell me about yourself. So how have you answered that question in the past? Toby, how have you answered that question, please?
It's a dreaded question, really, isn't it, sometimes? But I think you got to focus on your professional side, the career-wise, and make it short, make it snappy, don't go too lengthy,
Where do you start, though? For some of us, we go, okay, what do you actually want to know about me? Where do I start? Well, I was born, and then, it's a minefield. This question is so ambiguous. It's a challenge. I would find this a very challenging question. I don't know about how everyone else feels. What's people saying in the chat box?
I explicitly ask all interviewers to not ask me open questions and to avoid small talk. I am a position-related identity.
Okay, that's great. That is actually getting very clear about what your needs are. and asking the interviewer to keep their questions short, concise, etc. I really love that, because that demonstrates that you are taking complete control. Again, you might want to back it up and explain why that is, so they've got the understanding or insight as to why you might be asking that, because doing so makes them understand, makes them be a little more mindful as to why you're actually you've put in that adjustment, or you've requested that. So thank you for sharing that. That was excellent. Toby, can you just click, because we've got a couple of bullet points coming up. So here's a little activity. It's called building a bridge. So if they ask you that question, tell me about yourself. Well, what you want to do is you want to do like an elevator pitch, a couple of sentences. You want to summarize your professional experience. Give an example. It can be a little success story. Use star or power to do so. Ask a question to gauge what is behind the question. So if they're saying, tell me about yourself, and you give them a response, such as, you know, a broad overview of your professional experience, you can then back that up and ask them a further question. It helps to project positive and unique qualities. So it's just be very, very careful, because we can get into a whole loop with this particular one. We can end up, you know, giving an essay, but you want to keep it really clean and really concise. Just summarize broadly your professional experience. Make sure it's relevant to the job spec. You might destructure it in a way where you're giving them 3 key things about yourself and your professional background or experience. So what are everyone's thoughts on that? You know, in terms of when they're asking you to tell me about yourself, is this helpful? Maybe you have a better story to tell. Again, please share. Next slide, Toby. During the interview, okay, so it's really interesting, because when we're at the interview, often we have to provide past examples or past success stories to back up or demonstrate specific skills that we have, or to enable them to understand why we're the perfect fit for the job, right? But have you heard of the whole concept of future potential? Now, how this works is that you share with them what you would like to do in the future, specifically how you would like to help or support this organization. So if you've done your research, you know what their mission statement is and their values, you may gain an insight in terms of what they're wanting to achieve in the future, what their big goals are. Why not highlight to them how you can support them in those goals by highlighting and sharing your future potential? I hope I'm making sense. So when we focus on future potential, really you're doing is you're sharing what you can achieve, because by this stage, you should have already given examples of what you have achieved in the past that's relevant to what they're looking for. So in order to do this, here's a little exercise that you can do. Think about what you've learned about yourself that you didn't know before. What would you like to accomplish in this particular role? So again, going through the position description, what excites you about it? Where are the possibilities? And what's your trajectory? So is there career potential? Is there development in this opportunity? Here's a really interesting quote from Brent Beasley, and it's from an article called Interviewing for Potential. A person's ability to perform is based on their potential to succeed. Potential is the ability to perform long term. So I think it's equally as important to share your future potential as well as all of your past success story and results that you've had. What are your thoughts on that one? Please feel free to enter in to the chat box. So what else are people saying here? I'm going to just try and read out a few. Asking the employer what they would like you to focus on for the purpose of answering the question helps. That's really excellent. That's come from, who has that come from? That's come from, is it Sophia? Thank you for sharing that. So asking the employer what they would like you to focus on for the purpose of answering the question helps. That's great. So are you saying that when an employer asks a question, that you're asking a question back and asking them to give you an example, or you're asking them what, you're saying what they would like you to focus on. Okay, so you're asking them to narrow it down. Okay, that's really interesting. How has that worked for you though? Can you give me an example of when that's happened and how that actually helped you? I'd be really keen, because I think that's a really interesting perspective that you have. Okay, whilst you're doing that, we are going to move on to the next slide. During the interview, okay, so you're right in the middle of the interview, okay, you can't go back unless the Wi-Fi cuts out or something like that. If it's a remote interview, you want to gain or regain your composure. We talk about taking breaths, so take a breath. It's okay to have pauses, because you may want to process the question. And of course, you can say, it may take me a little bit of time to answer the question because I have delayed processing or something like that. Now, but you can take your time. You don't have to feel like you've got to answer the question instantly. So take a breath, take a moment. Have a sip of water. Sometimes I find that when you have a sip of water, it allows you to collect your thoughts. It gives you that couple of moments of pause. So pausing is okay. You can always ask them to repeat the question if you feel unsure of what it is that they've asked you. I have done that quite a lot because I want to make sure that I'm clear, that I understand what the question is, because sometimes if we don't answer that question, if we misperceive what the question is, then that can be really detrimental to your interview, right? So state why you're a premium candidate. There's a fabulous webinar, I think I spoke to it earlier, and that you can check out. It really talks about, how you are putting yourself first, how you're getting into a positive mindset of explaining why you are a premium candidate who's got lots of talent and strengths. And it really does focus on how you might want to share your disability or your neurodiversity, but coming from a very, from a strengths perspective. Again, as I said, it's about being strategic. You want to make sure if you're bringing it up, that it's a powerful example and that it speaks to some of the key selection criteria or the key skills that employer is seeking. Sometimes it's pretty cool to do it anyway, because you were wanting to bust myths. We mentioned earlier about the unconscious bias. And there is a real power in some of those success stories that we've had, as I said, not in spite of, but because of our condition, right? If you've got any success stories on that and you want to share them with us, please feel free to do so. Now, it's really important that you ask questions, but it's also really important that you ask the right questions. And it's also really important that you ask strategic questions. Remember, you're interviewing the employer as much as they are interviewing you. Employers apparently will have a higher perception of you if you're asking really solid, strategic and strong questions at the end of the interview. Why might you want to do it though? It shows you're engaged. It shows that you've probably researched the organization. Optics matter, apparently, right? It also looks impressive. It tells them that you're fully engaged. But I think the most important reason for this, guys, is that it helps you make informed decisions. Do I want this opportunity? Am I liking what I'm hearing? Is it the direction of where the company's headed and going? Does that fit in with you? Are their values the same as yours? Okay, so all of this is really important. So make sure when you're asking questions, you don't have to have 50 or 60. It might be that you strategically choose 4 or 5 questions about the role, where the company is going, because that will help you, as I've said, make a decision as to whether you actually want to move forward with the process. Is that helpful? What kind of questions have you asked? Do you think it's important or not? Toby, what's happening in the chat box?
Pretty quiet, but should we move on to the next slide? I'm just conscious about the time.
Okay, so Toby is keeping me on a very tight time schedule. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so closing the interview. So we're coming towards the end of the interview, right? We're kind of like, in one way, relieved, because all of the stuff that goes on in the middle of the interview, the stuff where you feel like you're under pressure to perform and answer these questions in the best way possible. So we're closing towards the interview, and this is a really important stage. There's an interesting formula called the 3+1 formula. And what you want to do is, just before you're about to say goodbye, handshake, or whatever it is, you want to do a closing pitch. You want to be able to demonstrate one last time why you are the right fit for this organization and what value you can bring. So you want to highlight 3 traits or skills that you have that's relevant to this job. You want to remind them of that. Okay, so sort of see it like a sort of a mini elevator closing pitch. Always ask about the next steps. Most interviewers will kind of, explain what the next steps in the process are. But if you want to, you can ask further information, but make sure that you're finding out what are the next stages. How long will the process take? How many people are there interviewing? When will you know? Will you be provided feedback? Be precise and let them know exactly who you are when you're giving that closing pitch. Here's a lovely quote. The brain loves closure because it's comforting. So it's comforting for you, and it can also be comforting for the employer as well. You want to finish off in a crescendo, right? You want to give them your best. So as a simple formula, it's called the 3+1. So close it down, 3 traits or skills, ask for the next steps. It's as simple as that. Next slide, Toby. Every experience holds a lesson. Whether we are successful or not, always ask for feedback. You'd be surprised how often many employers don't give feedback, and you've gone through that whole process, the application, the interviewing, and you don't get feedback. You are entitled to ask for constructive feedback. Feedback can be a very positive thing. It allows us to understand how we can improve for our next interview. So it's important to be very objective when you reflect on your interview, rather than the self-critical voice that comes out. I didn't do this, or I knew I wasn't going to get the interview. You always want to be very subjective and reflective, and take some time to reframe if you haven't been successful in getting the interview. Always look for the silver lining. And I always think that failure is a very, very, very big learner. It helps us to learn a little more. It teaches us who we are. I know that some people look at failure as a positive thing, not necessarily as a negative thing. So again, it all really comes down to your perspective and how you're viewing your interview, whether you're successful or not. So next slide, Toby. I think we're coming to the end. Okay, there's lots of resources on the Hive, lots of resources on interviewing specifically, because we know how important this is to you all. We've done a number of webinars on this now, so please feel free to go to the Hive and check out the articles, the tools, etc. How to succeed at interview with a disability is one webinar. Practice interviews with some apps. I don't know how you guys feel about using software or apps to do practice interviews. If you're uncomfortable using an app, you can always reach out to Even Break and ask Caroline and I to do a mock interview with you. So we're happy to do that. All you've got to do is simply request it. There is a lovely app though on the Hive called AutoQuest. It's for people who have autism, and it's a really, really supportive app that allows you to navigate and manage interviewing. If you haven't seen it, please feel free to check it out, or you can simply just type in AutoQuest into Google search, because there's a website that shares and gives you information around this specific app. Has anyone else got any other tools that they use or strategies? Again, put it into the chat box. I think that's our last slide, is it, Toby?
Yes.
Okay, do we have time to run the poll?
Yeah, we can definitely try and do.
Okay, let's run the poll one last time, guys. I want to get your insights into whether you found any of this beneficial, any of the strategies or tools. Has it got you thinking differently about the interview, your next interview when it comes up? So how confident do you feel now about that next interview? You feeling totally confident, not so confident, or do you still not have a clue? So let's see what comes up. What did you think of the stats, Toby? I thought they were really interesting, weren't they?
Yeah, interesting as before, but really interesting now, if you can see them.
Yeah, okay. So can you call it out for me, Toby? So totally confident, nailed it. 75%, not very confident, 25%. So what does that mean? Have we moved the dial forward slightly, or people feeling a little bit more confident, or are they starting to think differently about how they view the interview? I think there's been a little difference there. So guys, I want to thank you all very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure, but we have run out of time. But I highly recommend that you check out the Hive for all of those resources, or reach out again to Caroline and I, and we are more than happy to help support you navigate your job search and your interviewing or your application forms. That's what we're here for. So without further ado, I'm going to sign off and say thanks for coming today. Bye.
Hi, thank you.